Hello there. I am a lazy writer, and this is the weird little corner of the internet where I discuss the things that I thought about things. I haven't really worked out an intro yet, but I'm sure I will eventually. And I don't know how to do YouTube either. Is it a good idea to post a video about a game 5 months after it came out? Probably not, but who can say, not me. But I do have some random and pretty pretentious thoughts on Little Nightmares 2, which I just finished, so here we go. Oh, and there is a strong possibility that I will be mistaken about the lore or story, because I'm lazy, and this is more of an initial ideas after first playing a video than I actually did my research video. That said, there will be potentially inaccurate spoilers ahead for Little Nightmares 1 and 2. Anyway, point 1. The Helpless Protagonist. One of the fundamental elements of horror is the sheer helplessness of the situation that it presents, from the cosmic level of Cthulhu to the intimacy of Buffalo Bill's basement. The genre relies upon the terror of knowing that we are hopelessly outmatched. It's why we instantly forget our fears when we see a character trip 16 times running away from a slasher villain. If only they'd had some basic coordination, they easily could have survived. We probably could too. But whether it's through our younger selves, our children, or simply having human empathy, we can all identify with the endangered child. Danny Torrance, Bioshock's little sisters, and the children of the Little Nightmares games all draw terror through sympathy, or even if we cannot directly relate to them, we know children, and the experience of being a child, and we know that they, our future, are to be protected. They must survive. So whenever we see one of Little Nightmare's monstrous antagonists, our investment in Six, or Mono, reinforces and thus extends our fear from an emotional perspective. As with most, if not all good horror, you're invested in the characters and so you care about their peril. Furthermore, thanks to the added helplessness of being thoroughly alone, lacking any sort of parental figure in a hostile world where every adult is a murderous monster, the aforementioned peril never goes away. The feeling extends beyond the inability of so-called walking simulator protagonists because of the tiny size of Little Nightmares' children and the towering stature of almost every enemy. In fact, almost every antagonist seems like some cosmic existential threat, dwarfing the horrors of other iconic enemies because of that fact that it's so impossible to forget. Our protagonists are children. Everything will kill them, so you're scared of everything. The use of children therefore expands the horror in both emotional depth and overall scope, culminating in a greater sense of terror and dread than what should be available to what is otherwise a puzzle platform adventure game, which brings us to our next point, the escalating horror. Little Nightmares 2 in particular knows how to build tension in such a way that any given moment can be terrifying, while still evolving into new types of horror and gameplay mechanisms. This is particularly important for how it relates to those elements of puzzle, platform and adventure, which are not normally associated with horror and therefore provide some interesting opportunities for the series. For instance, players are often forced to solve problems or learn new ideas under stress and in fear. You learn how to use your torch to stop the mannequins, because if you don't, you'll die. You use to learn your powers to defeat the Thin Man, because if you don't, you'll lose and it will all have been for nothing. Rather than the slow, relaxed puzzle solving of adventure games like the Monkey Island series, where that eureka moment feels so rewarding, Little Nightmares relentlessly panics you until you escape and rewards you with relief and exhilaration. Sure, the puzzles are all pretty easy. You never need to combine a banana and a metronome to freeze a piano-playing monkey so that you can turn off a man-made waterfall. But this is in the interest of atmosphere, to sustain fear whilst avoiding boredom, frustration, or ridiculous adventure game logic. The game makes every key puzzle one that could reasonably be solved by its protagonist. Similarly, the relative ease with which players solve these puzzles means that the game can lack glaring direction or irritating hints, each of which would interrupt any suspension of disbelief and thus cut the game's vital atmosphere short. It's why each major installment maxes out at 4 to 6 hours, unless you're going for the collectibles, and it's a narrow line that the game walks, in my opinion, with ease. However, the speed at which we progress through the game isn't the only way that it stays interesting, as new elements of horror and gameplay are introduced and it never seems to run out of ideas. Take the Patience, those mannequins from the third chapter that chase you under the cover of darkness, preying on common fears of the shadows and the unseen. One minute you don't even know that they can move, and the next you're sprinting through hordes of them with your torch at the ready. In such a short time, you transition from alien to aliens, so to speak, from the horror of learning about their silent, eerie attacks, into fleeing dozens of murderous mannequins at once. However, unlike Aliens, Little Nightmares retains the terror of that initial realization. We don't have the time to understand these enemies in detail. We only know that we need to survive, somehow. After the first, we face a room full of them, and are shown that they can ambush us and negate our only defense, the torch, by attacking from different directions. Each time you step into a new room, there's the dread of realizing that there are more ahead, and that you have to adapt to each different scenario, sometimes sprinting, sometimes creeping, and even coaxing one out of its frozen state so that you can use its wheelchair to escape, into a room full of them, where you have to be quick on your feet and with the torch if you want to survive. I could go into detail about all the brilliant moments in this sequence alone, but the game clearly understands each horrific realization, every ounce of dread and fright. But strangely, it's best summarised by what comes next. The return of the crawling facehugger hands that you faced earlier suddenly seems like a welcome respite from the weeping angels of the other rooms. But even that moment becomes tense again as another hand appears, and suddenly we have to repel attacks from two enemies that can both one-shot us. And once they're dead, you can finally rest. Once the game has gleaned every moment of horror from every possible direction, you're greeted not by the light, nor any semblance of freedom, but by this image, these sounds. Everything will kill you, so you're scared of everything. It's so brutally, ruthlessly efficient, and it keeps us in the dark, dreading what's next when we see scattered televisions or a simple doorway inviting us inside. The game packs so much into a short time whilst retaining an accessible escalation of both gameplay and horror, and as soon as it's over, we move to the next thing. The stylized world of Little Nightmares, and each protagonist's youth, which serves to emphasize said style, brings into question how their childlike perspective is affecting our own. Do they truly occupy this world full of monsters, or are we victims of an unreliable narration that distorts the images of hospitals and orphanages to present a fiction fabricated in their young minds? That has some troubling implications, particularly in the more murderously inclined Little Nightmares 2. This flawed perception is explored in the morgue in particular, where the bodies of mannequins are meticulously prepared by the doctor, who hangs from the ceiling for fun, I guess. The use of the mannequins rather than corpses seems surreal, invoking Mono's trauma from the mannequin scene, whilst forcing us to question where the real bodies are, and what the doctor is doing obsessing over these artificial limbs instead. The games are excellent at providing creepy imagery, so this seems like a missed opportunity. However, the covered bodies that we traverse have real human toes. There are human corpses in this morgue, they just happen to be the covered ones, or perhaps things aren't so convenient. What if all of the bodies are human, and Mono is just too afraid of the truth for his young mind to acknowledge it? He hides his identity for much of the game, and his later identity is even hidden from him, so it's no stretch to wonder if he's hiding each body's humanity from us, and even from himself. In fact, there are instances where this seems likely. The empty, discarded clothes of mysteriously disappeared strangers build up the idea that each item of clothing is a lost soul, captured or killed off, leaving only the inanimate to signify their existence. This later makes a relatively ordinary image of the clothesline into a graveyard full of countless victims. As I said before, these games do imagery well, but all of this raises the question, what's he hiding from? The simple fear of the dead, or something more personally harrowing? He is, in one way or another, an orphan. Maybe the dead remind him of his family, or maybe he never saw them and he's so terrified that they might be deceased victims, or mindless, zombie-like viewers, that he covers their faces to protect himself. Again, I know very little of the lore, but it seems like an option that can't be ignored. As far as I know, every adult in this universe is hostile. It seems inevitable that his parents will become the same. The covering of his own face, of course, could indicate that he knows and feels guilt or pain about some level of what he becomes. The time-manipulating powers of the Signal Tower and the Thin Man might allow Mono to see some twisted version of what's ahead, something like respawning, where it appears that a doomed previous life was a nightmare, and that he now has to face his situation for real. However, it might also suggest that he's hiding from those that might recognise him, the family that have become monsters in this world where the adults seem set on murdering children. What if they're controlled by the Signal, and they were to catch and kill him, knowing, somehow, what they'd done? This is just wild speculation, obviously, but the vague nature of a story told without text or dialogue intentionally preys upon those ideas. We never quite know the truth, so our imagination expands upon the sparse facts and horrific implications. In the first game, for instance, the children live next to the kitchen, where the runaway kids are cooked upon capture by the chef. We are never explicitly told they are being reared in the interest of the gluttonous guests upstairs, but we uncover and imagine the process in disturbing levels of detail, perhaps wondering if we saw that child who helped us earlier being devoured in the frenzy at the end. And all this questioning, all this wondering, makes it so much more effective when we are caught, and we no longer have to imagine. This is why that childlike perception, the change in withdrawal and emphasis of imagery and the following implications, are so horrific and so effective.